In hindsight, I'm sure there's a lot of people who feel pretty stupid about benching guys like Brock Bowers or Caleb Williams last week, but hey, we got another week of fantasy football for you to correct those mistakes and actually win one this week. So we're going through the top 16 tight ends and quarterback rankings today, and I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for week 10, so make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. We'll start out with tier 1. We'll go Brock Bowers at number 1 and Trey McBride at number 2 in a tier by themselves. So the way I look at this one is at Denver tonight for Brock Bowers. That matchup is so not ideal. But the reality is, man, that's the only problem with this one. I can see it going bad because Denver obviously is going to do everything they can to stop Brock Bowers from anything happening. But at the same time, man, Brock Bowers is in this position to where he's so important in this offense, and especially with them getting rid of Jacoby Myers offensively, the importance of Brock Bowers, it just got even more so. So I don't see them shutting him down. And the reality is his ceiling is enormous, as was displayed in last week's game. Trey McBride at number 2 at Seattle, that matchup is just as bad. I mean, that is not a good one either. But I will tell you this. Everything for that offense is opened up with Jacoby Brissett, particularly Trey McBride. And the reason I say that is because if you want to know the reason why Trey McBride has been touchdown starving the past 2 years of his career and why he's starting to get a bunch of touchdowns with Brissett, it's because Brissett's not a shrimp and he can see over the line of scrimmage. It's very simple when you boil it down to that. He can actually see over his offensive line so he can deliver the ball to McBride in the end zone. So yeah, maybe he gets shut down in the open field, but in the red zone, he'll be a legitimate threat moving forward. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got George Kittle at 3 and Tyler Warren at number 4. With George Kittle versus the Los Angeles Rams, I actually really want in on this type of matchup because if you look at the last time they played earlier this season on Thursday night, this offense was moving the ball, and they actually beat the Rams. I actually think they could do really well this week, and so in this kind of high upside of a matchup, I'm willing to overlook the past several weeks for Kittle, which have not been good with Mac Jones, and we still think, as of the time of this filming, until proven otherwise, really, that Mac Jones will continue to start. So, yes, the floor is lower, but I think in this game, the ceiling is pretty high. Tyler Warren at 4, it's just an overseas matchup, versus the Atlanta Falcons. Anytime you get an overseas player, I'm going to rank them lower in all likelihood because offenses overseas just haven't been that good. Tyler Warren's one problem this year. Doesn't have a super enormous ceiling, but his floor has been really, really steady. I mean, he's just too important to the offense. So for me, even in this matchup where I don't love it going overseas, I still like it for fantasy this week. Dalton Kincaid's at 5, and Sam Laporta is at number 6. Dalton Kincaid at Miami, matchup couldn't be better. But really, my one problem with Kincaid is sometimes he does lose involvement in this offense. And I think in a game like this, if they crush Miami, could be just kind of over early and there won't be much need to throw down the field. Kincaid has been a downfield threat this year, though. And that's the one good thing with Kincaid is we're starting to see those ceiling games we thought we'd get from him last year. This year, he's actually coming through on that. So at this point, to me, I view him as a top 5 guy. And then Sam Laporta at 6 at Washington. The only problem with him is it's not consistent because they've got so many weapons everywhere. But I have said in previous weeks and over the offseason, I said this as well. I really like this offense for Sam Laporta without Ben Johnson because I think he's going to be utilized more. And I think this year he's been utilized more often than he was last year. So I do think Sam Laporta's ceiling is really high too. And his floor really isn't that bad. It's probably around 6 points, which is not bad for a tight end. And at Washington, I want in on the matchup. Oronde Gadsden at number 7 to round out this tier versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I've been saying this all week, and I'll reiterate it again. I want Chargers options, particularly the pass catchers. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense is already one I don't trust. They are Jekyll and Hyde. And they will come out sometimes looking like they did last week against the Colts, and then they'll come out other times and look like they did against the Packers. And if they looked like they did against the Packers, Gadsden has a huge night potentially ahead of him. Now, the only problem with Gadsden is that he is in position to where maybe it's his off week. I know one of them will have an off week. I don't know who, but the bottom line is I want pass options attached to Herbert, and they all have a very high ceiling this week. But I tell you this, it's really fascinating to see kind of the community's response to Gadsden, and he's just rising up these rankings so far for everybody else. So I'm kind of curious to put Sam Laporta and Aronde Gadsden up against each other in polls on fsroundup.com. So I'm going to go do that now by looking up Sam Laporta. Then I'm going to type in chat. Then I'm going to go to start a poll for week 10. And I'm going to add in Aronde Gadsden. And I want you to go vote on this poll. Tell me which way you're leaning for week 10 fantasy football. It's free to vote, free to start your own start-sit poll. And these are heavily utilized because you get live feedback and results from the rest of the community on what you should do. And again, completely free to do this. But if you want access to my top 250 rankings on a weekly basis, the automatic waiver wire tool, which is critical at this part of the year, and the comparison feature and league sync-up feature, well, that's all for $6 a month. $6 a month for league-winning features, man. You need to jump on this today because this price is excellent for league-winning features, man. Dropping down to our next tier, Dallas Goedert is at 8. And Mark Andrews is at 9. Now, Dallas Goedert at Green Bay, I do think that when you look at his importance and when you just kind of look at this tier overall, there's obviously going to be a lower floor for these guys because they either A, struggle with target share, or B, have split tight end rooms looking at the bottom 3 guys. Dallas Goedert has monopolized the tight end share in this offense, so that's not the problem. The problem ultimately is there has been weeks where Dallas Goedert's gotten like 3 or 2 targets, and the only way he can salvage it at that point is by getting in the end zone. Now, him and Jalen got their own little pitch game going that's been working really well, so I'm kind of inclined to trust that it keeps working against the Packers. Mark Andrews at 9, though, at Minnesota, it's completely boom or bust. Mark Andrews needs to get in the end zone, but the bottom line is I like his chances of doing that so much more with Lamar than I did with Tyler Huntley or Cooper Rush. It's just a very high possibility that that continues to happen. So I do think even with the involvement and the growth of Isaiah Likely with Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews is still the top tight end you want in Baltimore from a red zone perspective. And then we've got our 2 Cleveland tight ends in Njoku and Fannin. I'm going to continue to rank these guys back to back because they're both being used and they're both the number 1 and 2 targets for Dylan Gabriel. And that's going to continue to be the case. And the matchup is great. The reality is one of these guys, if they were alone, they would dominate this week. Like I would have David Njoku or Fannin ranked in the top 5 probably if they were alone. But that's not the reality. And we've seen it time and time again. Neither one of these 2 guys dominates. They're both equally involved on a weekly basis. That's why I think they're both good plays against the Jets this week. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got 2 guys in this tier, and you'll see why when we get down to the last tier. Hunter Henry and K. Dotton at 12 and 13. I think of these 2 guys as a mixture of touchdown upside and increased work because with Hunter Henry at Tampa, the matchup, they're both in the same matchup, right? At Tampa, I don't mind that matchup because the secondary has been prone to giving up big games to pass catchers this year. And number 2, I think Kayshon Boutte misses this game. And I think that maybe in one world, Stephon Diggs could be the lead guy. Or number 2, Hunter Henry gets a lot of opportunities, which has been a problem because he does still have a lot of games where he's off. I think it could be a non-game for Henry, and he's always a touchdown threat with Drake May playing out of his mind right now. K. Dotton at 13. I like K. Dotton this week because they're still missing pieces, man. I mean, they are still missing Bucky Irving. They're still missing Chris Godwin. Who knows if Emeka Egbuka's fully healthy after the bye? I kind of feel like he is. But K. Dotton's going to continue to see work. And that's just the way I see it. So I think K. Dotton is another solid play. And when I would play over guys in the last tier, dropping down to that tier, Colston Loveland, I know, like, I was so wrong on Colston Loveland last week. It made me mad because I was so dismissive to one person in particular on the live stream, and I apologized about it on Monday night. I got to do it again. I'm very sorry if you're watching this video, how dismissive I was about playing Colston Loveland. I was like, there's no way I'm playing this guy. He had his breakout party, and that was with Cole Kmet there. So versus the Giants this week, it's another easy matchup. It could be a massive game, but I still don't trust it yet. And I don't trust it fully to play him over other guys that have just been more consistently relevant in their offense. A.J. Barner at 15 versus the Cardinals. You know, Elijah Arroyo really is developing into an important target in this offense. I kind of do wonder, though, about what it's going to look like with the addition of Rashid Shaheed to that offense. So there is a chance that Seattle tight ends take a tumble in their upside for fantasy. But I will say the way Darnold's playing right now, everybody is a threat in that offense, particularly down the field. And that's where Barner has made a lot of his money this year, and same with Arroyo. So I'm going to stick with Barner at 15. And then Kyle Pitts at 16 to round out the tight ends here. Overseas game, I don't like the situation overseas. Matchup is whatever, I guess. I mean, Indy's defense, for the most part, has been very good. But also, Atlanta's offense is hot and cold. You know, it's funny. I was actually thinking to myself, like, what if the Falcons did really well and just bucked the overseas trend? I mean, I could see it. As weird as they are as an offense and as a team, I could see it, and maybe Kyle Pitts does well, but I would probably rather play other options this particular matchup. Now, going to our quarterbacks right here, we'll start out with our obvious tier, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. I mean, they both have matchups that I think can be beaten, and I think that Minnesota is obviously a much tougher outing. But the reason I think they could be beaten is, number one, it's Lamar Jackson, for crying out loud. I had a question last night, bench Lamar Jackson for Dart or something like that. And I was like, I get your point, but at the same time, man, Lamar has done so well. This isn't a Jaden Daniels situation where Lamar hasn't done well this year. Every time he's played, he's been 25 to 30 points. You continue to play Lamar Jackson, even against the Vikings, who I think could probably hold on for a couple quarters, but at the end of the day, they're going to get outclassed and outmatched offensively, so their defense is going to start to wear thin, particularly at the end of the game. Josh Allen at number 2 at Miami. Matchup is fantastic. He always does well against the Dolphins. And Josh Allen, of course, has the rushing upside on a weekly basis. He's done great this year for the most part. I'm going to continue to have him in tier 1. Dropping down to our next tier, Drake May at 3 and Caleb Williams at 4. Drake May at Tampa this week. Listen, I've said it a bunch this week. I actually think this could be a bad day for New England. I really do. Like, that's kind of one of my sneaky bets, if I was to make a bet this week, is that Tampa covers, they're able to win in this game. I think that Drake May, though, has been too good from a fantasy perspective to really put outside of this range. I mean, this guy has had basically a 20-point floor for the past month or so, really since that Buffalo game on Sunday night over a month ago. He's done so well in fantasy football, and I realistically, against Tampa's defense, which is sneaky good, I'm not going to put him much lower than this. Caleb Williams at 4 versus New York. I think it's a good matchup. He's at home. It's in his element, and he's coming off a really confident victory. And he played really, really well. Now, it was the Bengals defense, and the Giants defense is better than the Bengals defense, but they're having issues too. I mean, they've got a lot of issues, man, as a team. So I would bet that Caleb Williams continues to roll against the New York Giants this week. Jackson Darts at 5 and Jalen Hurts at 6 to round out the tier. That was also another question, and that might be a good one to post on FS Roundup, because I would be willing to bet that a lot of people would go with Hurts over Dart. But if all things are equal, I will play Dart over Hurts this week, because I like Dart's matchup too. And Dart himself has not had a bad game yet. Not one. And I think that's a very key thing, which is that you need to remember rookie quarterbacks are hard to scheme against for defensive coordinators. That is a tough thing that they deal with because they don't know tendencies yet. As many games as he's played, it's still not enough film for a lot of defensive coordinators to dissect and really know his weaknesses. So he's going to continue to roll for me, if nothing else, because he provides weekly rushing upside. And with the cast of weapons he's got no choice but to continue to run. And then Jalen Hurts at number 6 to round out the tier. I'm going to Green Bay on Monday night to play the Packers. And off the bye week, I would be inclined to trust this offense. But it is still weird, man. I mean, the offense has been very weird. They have good games on the ground, and then they have good games through the air. And it depends on matchup. It depends on what they want to do. I honestly don't know. But what I do know is Jalen Hurts, for all the weirdness in Philly, has been mostly very good in fantasy this year. 20 to 25 point is what you're going to get from Jalen Hurts. Sometimes on the high end, close to 30. So Jalen Hurts is nowhere near getting outside of the top 2 tiers, and I do think that he'll continue to do well. Dropping down to our next tier, Justin Herbert's at 7, and Matthew Stafford is at number 8. Justin Herbert versus Pittsburgh. There's a couple ways I would think about this one. Number one is, like I've said all week, I think the Chargers will do well. When they travel across country to go to the West Coast, it's not usually a good outcome. That's a tough flight to make. And then number 2, the other way you could think about this is they just lost Joe Alt for the rest of the season. That's a huge blow that will have ripple effects to everyone, including Herbert. But I think the other way to look at it is that he starts to run around more and be more consistent with it because he's going to get attacked if the Steelers pass rush can do what they did last week. But he's a good athlete and he can move. So I do think that that's a possibility this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And overall, I just like the upside of the matchup. Matt Stafford at 8 at the San Francisco 49ers. You know, the matchup is awesome because they're rolling out guys like you and me on defense. But at the same time, Stafford, and I talked about this on the live stream last night, he's been a guy that you can rely on. I mean, his last, 6 games have been awesome. You don't want to bench Stafford right now. So to me, the only thing that worries me, and the reason he's in tier 3 and not in a tier above this one, is because he's got no rushing upside. That's just the problem with Stafford, is his rushing upside is non-existent. So everything from a fantasy perspective is completely tied to his arm and how many touchdowns he throws. But the man's on fire. Stay in the flames because the matchup is great. Bo Nix tonight versus the Las Vegas Raiders at 9, and Jared Goff's at 10 at Washington. Now, Bo Nix, I do think, has a good game, and I do think the ceiling is high. But again, Bo Nix has been inconsistent this year, very Jordan Love-esque, where he can go in at any given week and be dominant in fantasy. Up until the last drive last week, Bo Nix was having a bad day in fantasy. How many times have you heard that this year? A lot. I mean, Bo Nix has been a massive problem for 3 quarters in a lot of games this year. But he pulls it out, and I do think that tonight it could be a weird one. I do really think that. So I've got him cautiously ranked, but I'm very optimistic about the upside. I will say that. Jared Goff at number 10, he just hasn't been that good in fantasy this year. His floor has been low this year, and his ceiling games kind of few and far between. You know, that's just kind of the reality with Goff right now. Matchup-wise, I love it, and that's why I'm going to stick with him at number 10 this week, because I do think the matchup is sweet against Washington's defense. But I will say, Goff and his lack of rushing ability, it's very Stafford-esque. And this year, he's not throwing as many touchdowns. So the upside in fantasy hasn't been there like it has been in years past with Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator. And then Baker Mayfield at 11 to round out the tier versus New England. Matchup again, I actually think has upside, and I do think Tampa will win this game. That's one of my big things this week. But Baker, in the same, vein as Goff, not been that great this year, particularly the last month, while the team has continued to just deal with injury after injury after injury to all of their weapons. So Baker's ceiling has just gotten lower, and his floor has gotten lower as well. He's not running as much, and Baker Mayfield has had a rough couple of weeks. Coming out of the bye week, I want to believe that they got some things right, and I do like the matchup this week. So Baker's at 11. Dropping down to our next tier, Jordan Love is back here at 12, and Sam Darnold is at 13. So Jordan Love versus Philadelphia. On one hand, the matchup doesn't sound very good. Philly off a bye week. They made some big moves at the trade deadline, to bolster up the defense and the back end and the front end. So in theory, I don't love the matchup. And Love has been so inconsistent. I mean, against great opportunities, he craps the bed. But you know what? One thing he's really good at? Playing under the bright lights. That's a thing with Jordan Love. So this guy, I do think, has a big ceiling this week, as he does in every week. But at the same time, man, his floor is low, and that's why I've got to mitigate risk and put him at 12. Sam Darnold at 13 versus Arizona. Matchup doesn't bother me as much, but I do think that Sam Darnold is just been really good for the most part in fantasy, but he hasn't had a ton of games like he just had. Sam Darnold has had his good moments, but he's also had some mid-ish moments. So what's the medium this week? It's a divisional matchup. I don't always love those, but I don't fear the matchup so much, and I do like the addition of Rashid Shaheed. How early does that play a role? Because I do think that could change the fortune of his fantasy upside. For now, I'll stick it with him at 13 as a respectable start. Mac Jones at 14 versus the Los Angeles Rams. Look, man, this is a really good opportunity. I mean, I get it. It's another divisional matchup. I don't always love those, but the last time we saw these two teams play, with Mac, by the way, Mac Jones was lights out. Lights out. And the Rams secondary is still very questionable. So I do think as long as they can keep Mac upright, this could be an awesome game for him. I really do. So I'm going to continue to roll with him. I get it. Brock Purdy has a chance this week. He's had a chance for weeks. Bottom line is the dude's got turf toe. That's tough to solve. Dropping down to our last tier. Daniel Jones lands at 15, and Aaron Rodgers is at 16 to round out the whole thing. Daniel Jones overseas. I don't like it. And I do also think there's something to the mental element that he really struggled last week. I mean, he was throwing completely ridiculous passes last week against the Steelers. He threw the ball right into the linebacker's hands last week. It looked like New York Daniel Jones. I wonder if we start to see some pullback from him from a playing perspective, and I don't like going overseas to remedy that problem. And Aaron at 16 at the Los Angeles Chargers. Again, I think the matchup is not as good as people think. I think they will struggle in this game, but Rodgers has still been, for the most part, very good from a fantasy perspective and just from an offensive perspective. They've got weapons. They're going to be in a negative game script. I do think this one could be a decent day in fantasy. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the top 30 running back rankings for this week, click on this video right here.